Welcome to the Tyler's Place video podcast by Masons, for Masons, brought to you by the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite, Southern Jurisdiction, live from the House of the Temple here in Washington, D.C. And I'm here with a guy you likely recognize if you watch our YouTube channel, the one and only Chris Ruli, 32nd degree, KCCH, author, historian, Scottish Rite Mason, and now officially you have been named the Assistant Grand Historian of the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry here at the House of the Temple. Congratulations.
Thank you.
As many times as you and I have talked, we've never done a who is Chris Ruli type of interview. And so let's start sort of at the beginning. And what brought Chris Ruli to the door of Freemasonry for the first time?
I moved to D.C. It was after the Peace Corps. So I was in the Peace Corps for 2.5 years.
Wow, where did you go to the Peace Corps?
I was in Senegal, West Africa. So I spoke Wolof, which is the local language. I was working on health projects for them. Came to D.C. to work for a public health organization. So during that time, I didn't know anyone. I didn't know anyone in D.C. I didn't have any friends or connections here because most of my friends were from New Jersey or family and stuff. And I just wanted to do a little something different. I remembered back in high school, I had a music teacher who was a Mason. He's a trumpet player. So if you're playing trumpet, and like once every month he would wear a gold ring, and I'd be like, what is that? And this was around the time when, National Treasure and all those things were permeating into the popular culture. And so I was like, what are the Masons? What do you guys do? And then, are you part of this strange secret society? And so over time, when I came down to DC, I was like, oh, maybe I should try Masonry. So I called. I literally went online. I Googled Freemasonry.
You called and got no answer.
No, I did.
Did you?
Yeah,
okay.
And
because if you're not a Mason, calling a Masonic lodge will 90% of the time yield no result because nobody's in the building most of the time.
Right. It was. I think it was a secretary. I think he was.
Gotcha.
I think the brother was a secretary at the time. Unfortunately, he passed, so he's not here anymore. But I called. It was a guy named Dean Clatterbrook, for anyone who cares online. But I called, and Dean picked up the phone, and he was an older gentleman, and he was like, well, tell me about yourself. And then he invited me to come visit the lodge, and I went and participated. And I think I was there for about 9 months, maybe 9-10 months, just going to visit. I didn't know what they were doing. I sort of left after dinner because they were going into their meeting. And so I met some good friends through that process, and then went through the initiation, went through the 3 degrees, got myself involved in, activities. And so I started to get in and get involved and to see what I can do with the archives. And that's what prompted my interest in research.
What was the first project you started to work on? It was, the archive, was it an artifact? Yeah. Was it just, let's get this straightened out, and that led you down another path? How did this whole thing unfold? Because this is a major deal.
Yeah, I mean, I come from this perspective, especially from work where in statistics you have very complicated math and you have to dumb it down to an audience to help people
like me,
to help people explain what's going on.
Sure.
And so in my mind, my mind is always focused on that. So when there's a very complicated thing, how do I make it easier for people to understand? And so with history and Freemasonry, it's sort of spawned that this is a very complicated thing. Telling someone, hey, tell me about Freemasonry in like a couple sentences is very difficult to do. And so I was interested in the history of my mother lodge, and I was interested in, there was no digital access. I didn't know what was going on. There was, so I started to just crack open the old ledger books and start to read. I found some old histories, and so it was sort of like detective work. And I sort of understand why Brent likes, Sherlock Holmes and all these guys, because I think history is detective work. It's investigative, it's journalistic. You're sort of going through trying to figure out what happened, perhaps sometimes finding missing pieces in newspapers and different sources. So it became a game for me, effectively. I started to look at what I can do. So my first project was to digitize the lodge's records. Well, we then started to digitize the lodge records. I'd start to see interesting, this guy was a Knights Templar. What's that? And then I went off and started to take a look at other records. And then my lodge work started to get noticed in the Grand Lodge because I used to go to the Grand Lodge offices and and pull records and things from there. And so I sort of opened up and branched out into different Masonic groups, different interests, but the focus is always on history and helping people explain history, talk about history, make it relatable to people, but also find things that maybe people didn't really realize was there.
What is it that you're most excited about in terms of getting to explore? Because previously there's some limitations, you know, what your lodge, what the Grand Lodge has, but now with this position ends up being more of an international acclaim because we cover, as the Grand Commander always says, we cover 17 of the world's 24 time zones.
Well, so illustrious Art de Hoyos, the Grand Historian and Archivist, he has done an extremely good job, and I would argue probably the best ever produced of working on the ritual. Where did the ritual come from? Who are the key players that helped develop the Scottish Rite ritual? How did it evolve over time? I mean, Art continues to work on that aspect of Freemasonry, or at least within the Scottish Rite. I think I can support Art's work, but also add to the other breadth of work that's out there on the people, the association itself, the Supreme Council. There's not a lot of work that has been done on that part. So we're complementing each other by, if Art focuses on the ritual and the history and all that stuff, I can do more of who are the key players in the Supreme Council, how did the Supreme Council evolve over time, the politics, the economics, the Freemasonry of it all. I think there's ways that, you know, we can both work at this stuff. So.
When you approach some of these long-standing institutions, the Scottish Rite being one, obviously the NMJ up in Lexington, Massachusetts, the George Washington Masonic Memorial, these long-standing libraries, museums, and things. To a lot of people, it seems like a walled-off community. How are you able to? I mean, I know you're a very affable guy, so are you just persistent? I feel like you're one of those guys who. You're like a dog with a bone. I've seen you do it. You don't stop. So what's your secret to getting those things to sort of open their doors and let you in to see these extraordinarily important things?
Yeah. Well, I've developed an understanding of where the material is based on experience. So, you know, through research, and I think we actually did a video on, you know, how to get research or how to do research. I think that's an important foundation. So if you're interested in doing research, there are some things that tools or experiences or things that you need to have under your belt in order to figure out how to get stuff done. Once you have that understanding of how to do research, the research project or the process of getting or accessing research is actually not that difficult. It just requires you to know where to go, what to ask for, who to reach out to, you know, reaching out to Art de Hoyos, for example, for Scottish Rite related stuff. You know, reaching out to the NMJ in Lexington for Northern Masonic jurisdiction. Now, all of these organizations have some of this stuff available online. You can do your own research. You can go search through their databases. So there's a lot of stuff that's already out there and available, but you got to understand the fundamentals. It's sort of like playing basketball or baseball, any sport. You got to learn the fundamentals first, and then once you learn the fundamentals, you can go out there and figure out what the project is or how to come it. I've discovered that the best questions or the research questions or things that I write books on come from very simple questions. So, for example, what is the relationship between the presidents and Freemasonry? That was the question that helped me create the White House and the Freemasons. What is the history of the Marquis de Lafayette, and why is the Marquis de Lafayette so important as a Freemason? That's the question that spawned the Brother Lafayette book. I would argue, and I have not seen anyone argue against this yet, but perhaps there is. I would argue that 20% of Freemasonry, the history of Freemasonry in the United States, has been covered. 80 to 70% is out there because the history is in these small lodges that operated around the country that people couldn't think about or don't really know about. And they thought, why would I ever want to write a history about this little lodge in my hometown? It probably didn't do anything interesting, but there is value there. There is so much value in getting that history and writing about the biography and knowing, you know, most people don't know what their country lodge looks like, or maybe they do, but they're not able to communicate that to younger generations. I think what happened was, and maybe someone can tell me I'm wrong here, But I think, back in the heyday, in the age of fraternalism after the Civil War and then the turn of the 20th century, there was so much stuff out there on Freemasonry that it made it accessible for people. It was in newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
You would find notices in newspapers about activities, and so people were more
a lot of
willing to
newspapers. The
engage.
Baltimore Sun, for instance, I'm working on something now. The Baltimore Sun
Had a fraternal
section.
Absolutely.
They publish once a week.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And so my idea is, when the fraternity moved away from this and when it closed itself in and became a secret society, quote unquote, which it never really is.
No.
When the fraternity did that, it made itself less accessible to the outer world. And so people don't know who were members of the lodge, don't know what they were participating in, don't know what the economic impact or the economic benefit that lodge had on a society, right? And so how would you know if the lodge down the street used to take care of widows and orphans? They were a chief benefactor to help a family survive for several decades. That's all gone because no one thought, well, we didn't really do anything interesting over there, so no one wants to know about the history. So my thing is, if you're in any lodge should have a history of its organization, and you should try to be as thoroughly, reviewed as possible. List the names, list the activities. It might not be beneficial for you right now, but some historian, 2 years later, 3 years later goes, or maybe 10 years later, who knows, comes back and looks at that book and goes, this was really helpful because I didn't realize this guy was a Mason, and I can put the pieces together.
It helps to connect all those dots. That's Chris Ruli, the author, the historian, the editor now of the Plumline, and the assistant grand historian of the Ancient Accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, whose see is at Charleston and whose building is here on 16th Street. Congratulations again, brother.
Thank you,
super
sir.
proud of you,
Appreciate
super
it.
happy for you. And there's going to be lots more from Brother Chris. And thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And thank you for reading the Scottish Rite Journal. We'll talk to you soon. Hope you enjoyed that interview with our new Assistant Grand Historian, Grand Archivist, Brother Chris Ruli. And there is a lot more to that interview. First, if you go to the January-February 2025 edition of the Scottish Rite Journal, you will find more of that interview. And right here on YouTube, as part of our Lost Media archive, in the members only section, we've got the entire interview with Chris. He shares some of his insights on how to get into Masonic research, how to do it correctly. He talks a lot about the Scottish Rite Research Society and some of the exciting things coming ahead. And we would love to have you check that interview out. And you can do that, get access to that interview, and help us preserve things like this for only $2 a month. This is a reel-to-reel tape from 1949. And it was sent here to the House of the Temple, sent to the then Grand Commander from a staff sergeant who was overseas in Germany. So who even knows what's on this tape? But by joining the Lost Media Archive for only $2 a month, you can help us figure out what's on this tape and lots of other Lost Media pieces in our archive. Everything from reel-to-reel tapes like this one, to records, to VHS, to Betamax, to things that might have been lost to history. But thanks to our Lost Media Archive members, for only $2 a month, we're able to preserve that history. We're finding this old equipment, we're buying it, we're getting it repaired, and we're using it to figure out what's on tapes like this. Who knows what Masonic mystery and what Masonic history is hidden on here. So go ahead and click that button right there and join the Lost Media Archive. Make sure you subscribe by clicking right there, and thanks for watching.